Is a professor of international affairs at Georgetown University, and he joins me now live from Maryland. Great to have you here with us on TRT World. So certainly a huge setback for New Delhi, but particularly for Modi, because he's someone who has at many occasions praised Donald Trump. So what do you think this latest development tells us about the current state of relationship between Modi and Donald Trump?
Well, you're right to say that there were high expectations in New Delhi about what would transpire in the U.S.-India relationship once Trump was back in power. Modi and Trump had a good relationship in Trump's first term. Trump is fairly popular in India, in part because he's seen as a populist leader in the same mold as Modi. But ever since Trump has started his second term, the relationship with India has really gone south, starting over the fight that broke out between India and Pakistan, where Trump said he's the one who brokered the end of that war, whereas Modi says he won, he forced Pakistan's hand. Now we see tariffs, not just 25% tariffs on goods, but this additional penalty on Indian purchases of Russian oil. And so right now, I think we're in a very uncertain, unstable point in the relationship. There's a lot of anti-American sentiment building up in India, and it's particularly puzzling to Indians. Why is Trump singling out India? What about China? They're buying Russian oil. What about Turkey? Turkey's buying Russian oil. India seems to be bearing the brunt of Trump's anger.
Professor, let me ask you here, do you think these tariffs are actually going to stop New Delhi from doing this oil trade? Because I believe that's the end game, right? What do you make of that? Is that possible that India might be forced to stop this trade based on these tariffs?
If you step back from the announcement today and say, will American sanctions against Russia, will secondary tariffs against purchasers of Russian oil succeed in strangling the Russian economy? The answer is no. Sanctions have been the weak link of the U.S. and European response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And I don't think in the end of the day, Trump is prepared to impose the tighter sanctions and the higher tariffs that really would be needed to make a difference. So I think that we really need to hope that a combination of diplomacy plus the continued armament of Ukraine will be enough to convince Putin to stop. Where we are right now, as your correspondent in Washington just said, it's very difficult to know. A meeting appears to be taking shape between Trump and Putin, but we have no indications yet that Putin is negotiating in good faith. He keeps talking to Witkoff, he keeps talking to Trump, and then he sends 600 drones against Ukraine. Still no sign that he really intends to wrap up this war anytime soon.
And Professor, what do you make of the fact that Putin met U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff a few days after Donald Trump issued this stern warning to Moscow? Because President Putin, over the past many years, has always tried to present himself as a tough guy. So the fact that he met Donald Trump's envoy, despite this warning coming from the White House, from the U.S. president himself, what do you think this tells us about President Putin's current stance on the situation, or perhaps his posturing?
I have to express a certain amount of skepticism that we're seeing a turning point here. And that's because we've had 5 phone calls between Putin and Trump. We've had 5, I think 6 meetings between Witkoff and Putin's advisors. We've had American diplomats meeting Russian diplomats in the Middle East. We've had proposals for Trump to meet Putin and Zelensky in Istanbul. And what does it amount to so far? Nothing. So we really have to see some sign that the Russians are ready to negotiate in good faith, that they're ready to say, okay, no more air attacks. Okay, we're going to stop pushing along the front line. Okay, we're reducing our demands about what the end game looks like. We're not going to require that Ukraine gets no more assistance from the West. Up to this point, we have seen no clear indication that Putin is ready to pull back from his maximalist war aims. I'm waiting to see that before I would say we're getting close to the end game.
And how do you think, or what do you think this means for President Zelensky and Ukraine? Because if a meeting between President Donald Trump and President Putin takes place, would you say that it's going to be a setback for President Zelensky?
No, I don't think so. I think Zelensky is in a much better place today than he was a few months ago when Donald Trump was throwing him out of the Oval Office and turning off the flow of intelligence and assistance to Ukraine. Trump has definitely changed his position. He had a good NATO summit. He said, yes, Europe, you can now buy weapons for Ukraine. He has said, I'm going to defend Article 5 and I'm going to support Ukraine. We don't know, but he may well approve additional shipments of U.S. weapons to Ukraine. So his position has changed because I think he felt that Putin was taking advantage of him, talking to him on the phone, saying nice things in their conversation, and then launching weapons against Ukraine. In the end of the day, this is not a war that will end on the battlefield. Ukraine is not going to win. It's in Zelensky's interest for Trump to try to get a deal, but it has to be a deal that's acceptable to Ukraine. And that means Ukraine needs to emerge from this war as an independent, secure, sovereign country. Putin has not yet agreed to that.
Fascinating insights, Professor Charles Kupchan. Thanks very much for joining me here on TRT World. I really appreciate your taking out the time.
Good to be with you.